Baby Jordan, because he did everything that Michael Jordan did when he was in college, as far as dunking wise.
He could break you down and finish at the rim. His vertical and hang time were off the charts, and he was one of the best dunkers the game had to offer during his short career. And these traits were a big reason for him being given the Baby Jordan moniker. But that was where the Harold Miner-Michael Jordan similarities ended, as the rest of Miner's game and career were a far cry from his airness. Miner had the raw talent and athletic ability to dominate at the high school and collegiate level, as he was one of the greatest USC Trojans of all time. But when he got to the NBA, it just seemed that nothing went right. He did win a couple dunk contests, but when it came time to play, the holes in his game became more evident, like his lack of a consistent jump shot and a propensity to play ISO ball. But he also dealt with chronic knee issues his entire career, and he could never hold on to consistent playing time, being somewhat inexplicably pulled from the starting lineup on multiple occasions, even if he was producing. But there were very few players who brought the excitement that Harold Miner did, as fans were ready to explode whenever he had the ball and a clear path to the hoop. Let's jog your memory. A California native, from a young age, Harold Miner had a tendency to engage in some unusual behaviors. They were never anything bad, just things that most people wouldn't do and wouldn't be so necessary to their everyday life. Yet Miner would perform these behaviors even if people made fun of him, such as running his fingers against walls or re-entering a room over and over again to feel the doorknob. It wasn't until an adult that Miner considered he might have some form of OCD, but for something that could seem so inconvenient, Miner saw it as a major reason for why he was able to improve his game and set himself apart, as he would spend hours working on a new move at the courts until it felt just right, and he attributed some of his great vertical leap to his fixation on jumping and touching stop signs and street signs. By 11 years old, Miner was accompanying his brother Steve to pickup games. Soon after, he was looking for games on his own, all while dominating everywhere he went, so it wasn't much of a surprise when that domination continued once he enrolled at Inglewood High. As a junior, he would average 27 points per game, then up that to 28 points as a senior, as he once had a game with 48 points and 17 rebounds. So Miner had many powerhouse programs recruiting him, yet he would choose local USC, as he was intrigued by the prospect of helping turn their basketball program around. Going into the 1990 season, Miner was joining a Trojans team who hadn't had a winning season or tournament appearance since 1985. USC's strength was in their athletic, high-scoring trio of Miner, junior forward Ronnie Coleman, and junior guard Robert Pack. But Miner came in on a tear as a first-year player. He would lead the Trojans in scoring at over 20 a game, while finishing third on the team in assists and tying for second in steals, as he also shot over 42% from deep on over 5 attempts per game. Miner was a day one starter, finishing as the second best scorer in the Pac-10, while setting the conference freshman scoring record, which would earn him both a first-team all-conference selection and the Conference Freshman of the Year award. Miner would have 2 games with at least 30, including a 34-point performance in a win versus Stanford. Additionally, on February 1st, USC would pull off a 1-point upset win over rival UCLA, who was ranked number 16 in the nation, as Miner finished with 27 points. But this was the Trojans' high point of the year, as they managed just an 11-15 regular season record, and then after losing to Arizona in the Pac-10 tournament quarterfinals, their year was over, as they did not receive a tournament berth, with Miner's freshman season ending with him averaging about 20.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. The second and final year of the Trojans trio came in 1991, as all 3 players upped their scoring to combine for nearly 56 points per game, as USC had a significantly improved scoring offense. Miner again led the team in scoring, while also finishing second in rebounding and steals. His 3-point percentage had dropped, but he was still shooting nearly 34% on 6 3-point attempts per game. Miner would again finish second in the conference in scoring, as he would once again be voted first team all Pac-10. The 91 Trojans would get off to a strong 8-1 start, but would then lose 5 of their next 6, to overall finish the regular season at 19-9. But they had pulled off a couple upsets, in defeating number 12 UCLA on January 30th, then defeating number 5 Arizona a week later. And after their first winning record in 7 seasons, they would also get their first tournament berth in 7 seasons. Yet it was over quickly. USC would take on Florida State in round 1, and although it was close, the Trojans lost by 3 points, as Miner struggled, putting up 16 points and 6 rebounds, yet also shooting just 7 of 27 from the field, with his sophomore year ending, seeing him average about 23.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. If it wasn't already clear, it was undoubtedly Minor's team going into 1992. Pack and Coleman were gone, so Minor would have to up his scoring again, as Dwayne Cooper would be the only other player on the team to average double figures. So Minor would finish first on the team in scoring and second in rebounding on career-high numbers, while shooting over 35% from deep on nearly 5.5 attempts per game, as Minor would lead the conference in scoring and would get a lot of those points at the line, as he would also lead the Pac-10 in free throw attempts and makes. And by season's end, he was again named first team All-Pac-10, but would also be Pac-10 Player of the Year and a consensus first team All-American. Minor would be the team's leading scorer in all but 2 games this season, as USC again started strong at 8-1. Then after losing 2 straight, they would string together a 9-game win streak, which included an upset win over number 2 UCLA at Pauley Pavilion. USC would go 6-2 in their final 8 games, which would include another win over now number 4 ranked UCLA, with Minor putting up a game-high 29 points and 13 rebounds. As this would propel USC to the number 8 rank in the nation, their highest ranking of Minor's career, and they would end the regular season on a high note, as they defeated number 2 Arizona by 1 point in their final game, with Minor putting up a game-high 21 points. And a 23-5 record would see them enter the NCAA tournament as a 2 seed. They would run through Louisiana Monroe in the first round, as Minor put up a game-high 23 points and 6 rebounds on over 58% shooting in a 30-point win. The second round brought Georgia Tech, who USC was expected to defeat, but Minor couldn't get anything going, as he had just 4 points at halftime, and USC was up by a single point. He would play better in the second half, as he ultimately finished with a team-high 18 points and 3 steals, but he would shoot less than 30% from the field, including going 3 of 12 from deep. Yet USC still held a 2-point lead with under a second left. However, Minor and the Trojans would be on the wrong end of James Forrest's Miracle in Milwaukee buzzer beater.
Under the basket, up, Forrest shot.
So a heartbreaking loss would end the Trojans' year early, as Minor finished the season averaging about 26.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Minor would elect to forego his senior season and enter the '92 NBA draft, and his stock was high. But just to get an idea how highly he was thought of by some media outlets, Sports Illustrated chose him as their '92 College Player of the Year, ahead of guys like Christian Laettner, Alonzo Mourning, and Shaquille O'Neal. But these 3 big men were the mostly consensus top 3 picks of the NBA draft. Yet after them, Minor was considered by many to be a top 5 pick and arguably the best guard prospect in the draft. So it was quite the shock to him when he fell out of the top 10. But when the Miami Heat were on the clock, they were getting what looked to be the steal of the draft.
12th pick in the 1992 NBA draft, the Miami Heat selects Harold Minor from the University of Southern California.
So Minor fell to the 12th pick in the draft, and it was no secret that he had some holes in his game he would need to fix if he wanted to be a star, with his draft day analysis highlighting the most glaring weaknesses in his tendency to force shots and inconsistent defense. But the upside made this pick look great for Miami, and he would also sign a very interesting contract. On the surface, it looked normal, but there was a more analytical clause, which could result in him earning the right to renegotiate his 5th year if he ranked among the league's top guards as determined by a computer program. But if he failed to meet that criteria after his first 4 years, the Heat could either pick up his 5th year option or drop him. Miami was still a relatively new expansion team, but now had a solid core, featuring Glenn Rice, Ronnie Cycli, and Steve Smith, as the team were coming off their first playoff appearance in franchise history. And it was going to be a big change for Minor now that he was a professional. The Heat already featured more established combo guards in the 2nd year Steve Smith and 4th year Kevin Edwards. And although Minor had been head and shoulders above a lot of his competition in college, that gap had become virtually non-existent once he hit the NBA, and his athleticism and natural talent could only get him so far. Instead of being the focal point of the offense like he was at USC, he had to figure out where he fit on this team. And unfortunately for him, it never seemed like head coach Kevin Loggery was too interested in helping him carve out that role, as Minor would get less than 19 minutes per game as a rookie, and it likely would have been even less had Steve Smith not missed the first 3 months of the year recovering from knee surgery, with Kevin Edwards then missing nearly all of February and March. So Minor would appear in 73 games, and while he would have plenty of exciting moments with acrobatic finishes and highlight dunks, he wasn't putting up USC numbers. But over 10 points per game on over 47% shooting isn't too bad, as his per 36 scoring was at nearly 20 points per game. He would hit double figures in 37 games, including 6 games with at least 20. But one thing Minor was no longer doing was shooting threes, as after averaging over 5 per game in college, he would take just 9 in total this season and only connect on 3 of them. But his earlier mentioned above the rim play would get him a spot in the '93 dunk contest, where he would exhibit his closest similarities to Michael Jordan by winning the competition and showing his otherworldly vertical. The other storyline of Minor's rookie year would occur whenever Miami played Chicago, as everyone wanted to see the original Jordan versus the baby Jordan. They would face off 3 times, and Minor would get his chances, averaging over 27 minutes per game in those contests. But Jordan didn't make it easy, as Minor averaged 11.6 points, but would shoot below 38%, with Jordan averaging 34 points and 6.6 assists on over 51% shooting. But Minor's most memorable play of these matchups was when he hit a tough shot to put Miami ahead by 1 late in the 4th quarter of a March 11th game, which they would eventually win by 2, marking their first time defeating Chicago in franchise history. But overall, the Heat's record in '93 wasn't much different than '92, and at 36-46, they weren't able to make a return to the postseason, as Minor's rookie year ended with him averaging about 10.5 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. Although Minor had played 73 games as a rookie, he was bothered most of the season by pain in his right knee, so during the offseason, he had surgery to remove cysts and clean out cartilage, as it looked like he was primed for an even better year 2. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the case. Technically, he did have a better year, as he slightly improved his numbers across the board while getting almost 3 more minutes per game, and starting 31 of the 63 games he played, after not starting a single game as a rookie. But as Minor would say in a later interview, it seemed like every time he was hitting his stride this season, his knee issues would return and slow him down. Minor began the year as a starter opposite Rice on the wing. He would have 29 starts in the team's first 30 games, and would average 12.7 points and 2.6 rebounds on 47.6% shooting, with Miami going 15-14 in those games, until Brian Shaw would replace him in the starting lineup, as along with Minor's knee problems, he wasn't the most reliable defender and could be a ball stopper on offense, with his tendency to ISO once the ball came to him. So overall this season, he would hit double figures in 33 games, which would include his career high of 28 points on 10 of 16 shooting in a December 11th win versus Boston, as this season would also see him record his only career double-double after a 16-point, 10-rebound performance in a March 13th win versus Boston. Miami was able to put together their first winning season in franchise history, as they would finish at 42-40, which would be enough for a first-round matchup versus Atlanta. Minor continued coming off the bench, averaging 8 points on about 46% shooting, with his best performance coming in a Game 2 loss when he had 15 points on 7 of 13 shooting. The series would go the distance, but Minor wouldn't see the court in Game 5, and it would end with Atlanta taking it easily to end Miami's season, as Minor's second year ended with him averaging about 10.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But the '95 season would be a year of change for Miami, yet Minor wouldn't really benefit from any of these changes. Soon after '94, Minor made it clear that he wanted to trade due to being unhappy with his erratic playing time. Yet the Heat weren't planning to grant his request anytime soon, as they weren't going to let Minor dictate their decisions. But then shortly before the '95 season, Miami shipped Cycli to Golden State. Then after 2 games, they would trade Smith to Atlanta. Additionally, they had already lost Shaw to free agency, so it looked like there might be some more playing time in Minor's future. But again, that wouldn't be the case. He would become a starter after the Smith trade, and would average 11.3 points and 3 rebounds on about 47% shooting, before he was benched after just 12 starts, with the Heat going 4-8 in those games. Yet the Heat were struggling altogether, as they were 17-29 at the All-Star break, when Laughery was fired and replaced with assistant Alvin Gentry. And this was probably a relief for Minor, as he and Laughery had never seen eye to eye. And maybe this even helped Minor at All-Star weekend, as after being unable to defend his '93 slam dunk title last year due to injury, he would regain it this year by winning the '95 slam dunk contest. And it was nice to see Minor having fun and playing above the rim, as knee and back injuries would limit him to just 45 games this season, and his playing time didn't really see any change under Gentry, as he would only record double figures in 14 total games, and the Heat would continue to struggle with Gentry, finishing at 32-50 and missing the playoffs, with Minor's year seeing him average about 7.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But now, over the summer, the Heat would grant Minor's request. On June 14th, Minor was traded to Cleveland along with a second-round pick for a second-round pick and future considerations, as the Heat gave up an earlier selection just to get rid of Minor, so they could have the cap space to sign Sasha Danilovic. But Minor could barely stay on the court in '96. Minor wouldn't get much playing time, but he would appear in 14 of the team's first 19 games of the season, hitting double figures twice, which included a season-high 13 points in a November 15th loss to Chicago. But he would then appear in just 5 more games the rest of the season due to his knee issues, as he would play his last game in late February before undergoing knee surgery in early March, officially ending his year. Yet the Cavs would finish at 47-35, but would then be swept by New York in the first round, as Minor's season ended with him averaging about 3 points, half a rebound, and half an assist per game. At this point, Minor had been told he had a degenerative knee condition, and after learning of this, the Cavs declined to pick up his second-year option. Interestingly, prior to the Cavs releasing him, they had a trade in place which would have seen Minor sent to Toronto for Victor Alexander, but it would be Alexander who would fail the physical, leading to the Cavs voiding the trade. But a free agent Minor would then get a tryout with Toronto, reporting to training camp in the best shape of his life. But soon after he arrived, he slipped on a wet spot during a workout and re-aggravated his knee, which led to him struggling at training camp and ultimately failing to make the team. As he would say, this was when he finally had the realization that his career was over, which was likely a tough pill to swallow at just 25 years old. A Sports Illustrated article would highlight years later how difficult it was for Minor to cope with his career being over after just 4 seasons. Not just because he lost what he was passionate about, but because he no longer had the activity that he obsessed over his whole life, making it a very difficult adjustment, until his son was able to gradually help him return to watching and teaching basketball. Yet even though his career didn't go as he or anyone else hoped it would, he handled it gracefully, and more importantly, he set himself up for life by being financially responsible during his playing days. Harold Miner was one of many 90s swingmen who would be given the next Jordan comparison, but if you're going strictly off the eye test, he may have been the closest, with his high-flying acrobatic play, bald head, and wagging tongue. If you squinted, it could look like Michael Jordan. But once he got to the NBA, it was more obvious that he couldn't get by on talent alone, and had a lot of holes in his game he needed to improve. And yeah, he probably relied on iso ball too much, and he had all the tools to be a better defender than he was, but he never really played completely healthy in the NBA, and chronic knee injuries are some of the worst ailments a basketball player can deal with. Then you add in that he never really knew what to expect as far as playing time went, going from a starter to a bench role multiple times in his career without a lot of explanation, and his underwhelming career is a combination of his own flaws and unfortunate circumstance. But Harold Miner will always be a legend for his USC days alone, and highlight reel dunks are always a fan favorite, and those were Harold Miner's specialty. But that's it for today's episode on Harold Miner. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Miami teammates, or this one on one of his 92 draft mates who was also declared the baby version of an NBA Hall of Famer. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.